Hey everyone, and welcome back. We're diving into some fascinating articles today, all about AI and what it might mean for the future of work.
Sounds like we've got a lot to unpack.
We do. I've been looking through these articles, and there's everything from the economic impact to some pretty surprising findings about the jobs that seem to be affected most by AI right now.
I'm intrigued. What kind of sources are we looking at?
We've got economic forecasts from sources like McKinsey and the IMF, even a Nobel laureate weighing in. But then we've also got specific news about some of the big players in the AI field, like, OpenAI, and this really interesting company called DeepSeek that's based in China.
DeepSeek. I'm not very familiar with them.
Yeah, they kind of came out of nowhere, but apparently they have developed a chatbot that rivals ChatGPT. And it sounds like they did it with way less investment than OpenAI.
Huh. That's interesting.
Yeah. And what's really interesting is that Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, he wasn't even really that surprised that DeepSeek emerged. Yeah. He even kind of praised their approach, particularly this thing they're doing called chain of thought.
Chain of thought. I'm not sure I've heard that term before. What does it mean?
Yeah, so from what I gathered, it means their AI models actually break down problems step by step, kind of like how we humans think through problems. So instead of just giving an answer, it might show its reasoning, which could make it easier to understand and trust.
So it's not just about getting the right answer, it's about explaining how you got there. That makes a lot of sense, especially if we're talking about using these systems for important decisions.
Right. And this all ties into this whole issue of AI governance, which I know was a big topic at that AI Action Summit in Paris recently.
All right.
Altman was actually there, and it seems like there are a lot of different approaches and concerns, especially when you look at how quickly AI is developing in China, given how the government controls technology and data.
Yeah, it definitely adds a whole other layer of complexity when you're thinking about who's building the best AI and then also how those AIs will be used and regulated. That's a lot to consider.
It is. So we've got this new player on the scene, DeepSeek, kind of shaking things up. And then there's this massive economic question hanging over everything. Will AI just bring modest gains, or are we headed for some major disruption?
Yeah, I mean, McKinsey is predicting something like $25 trillion annually.
I know. That's a huge number. And then you've got the International Monetary Fund, the IMF. They're saying AI will impact 40% of jobs. So it seems like change is coming one way or another, right?
It does.
But then you've got someone like Daron Acemoglu. He's a Nobel laureate, and he's saying we'll probably only see like a 1% GDP boost in the next decade. Why is his prediction so much more conservative than all these others?
Well, Acemoglu has a really interesting argument. He says most of what AI can do profitably right now are what he calls easy-to-learn tasks. So things like sorting data or translations, stuff with very clear instructions and a predictable outcome.
Okay, so things that can be easily broken down into steps, kind of like that chain of thought idea.
Exactly. But Acemoglu's skeptical that AI, at least for the near future, can really take on more complex tasks that require judgment, creativity, adapting to unforeseen circumstances, the stuff that's harder to define or program.
So things that are harder to program into an algorithm.
Yeah. And he also makes the point that most of the investment in AI is happening in big companies, the Googles and Microsofts of the world. Smaller businesses might not see those same benefits, at least not for a while.
So even if AI does revolutionize things, it might not be this sudden massive shift. It could be a much more gradual thing.
Right. It's kind of like with any new technology. You have all this hype at first, and then reality sets in.
Okay, so let's think about what all this means for the average person, the worker. I was looking at this Anthropic Economic Index, and they've got some really interesting findings about how AI is being used in different occupations. Over a third of jobs are already using AI for at least a quarter of their tasks.
Wow, that's a pretty significant number.
It is.
That might sound alarming, but what's interesting is that most of this AI integration is being used to augment what humans are doing. It's more about enhancing capabilities, not replacing people.
So more like a helpful tool than a job-stealing robot.
Right. And here's where things get really interesting. The index actually found that mid to high wage occupations, especially those in tech and writing, they're seeing the most AI integration.
Really? I would have thought it would be the other way around, with the low-wage jobs going first.
It is a fascinating trend. It suggests that some skills and knowledge might be more adaptable to working with AI, maybe because of those hard tasks that Acemoglu was talking about.
Yeah.
If those are the tasks less likely to be automated, then it makes sense. Those jobs would be less impacted.
Yeah, makes sense. But what about the people in lower-paying jobs that aren't seeing as much AI integration? If their jobs don't get that same productivity boost, could that lead to even more economic inequality?
That's a valid concern.
So it's not just about will AI take our jobs, but how will it impact things like the distribution of wealth and opportunity?
Exactly. And that reminds me, we should probably talk about Mark Zuckerberg's prediction.
Oh yeah, the AI engineer one.
Yes. He thinks that an AI engineering agent could actually be as skilled as a mid-level human engineer by 2025.
Wow. So we're not just talking about tasks, we're talking about entire job roles being filled by AI in just a few years.
That's what he's suggesting. And he thinks that whichever company gets there first will have a huge advantage. So there's this real sense of urgency, almost like a race, to develop these really advanced AI systems.
Like the space race all over again. But instead of reaching the moon, it's about creating an intelligence that can rival our own.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about the economic side of things, how AI might reshape the workforce. But before we move on, there's one more thing I wanted to bring up. It's a little bit lighter, but also pretty mind-blowing. One of the articles you sent me was about AI actually writing a bluegrass humor column.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one.
Apparently it wasn't half bad. Even managed to include some classic bluegrass cliches.
Right.
But here's the really wild part. A study from USC, the University of Southern California, found that jokes written by AI were actually funnier than the ones written by humans.
Which is fascinating when you think about what it actually means to be funny. Is humor just about patterns and punchlines, or is there something more human about it that AI can never really replicate?
It really makes you wonder what other things we think of as uniquely human AI might be able to do, or even do better than us in the years to come.
It opens up a whole world of possibilities, doesn't it? Both exciting and maybe a little unsettling.
It does. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground already. It's amazing how much there is to talk about with AI. And this is just scratching the surface, really.
Yeah, we've given our listeners plenty to think about for now. Maybe we should take a break and come back to explore some of this further.
Okay, so we just spent the last half hour talking about how AI might be changing everything from global economics to, bluegrass humor of all things.
Yeah, it's amazing how wide-ranging these impacts seem to be. Touches so many aspects of our lives.
It does. And yeah, we were talking about all those economic predictions and those huge discrepancies between them. Like McKinsey's talking $25 trillion annually.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got Acemoglu with his much smaller projections. It's hard to know how to make sense of such a huge range,
Right. Well, it's really important to remember that those are based on different models, different assumptions. They're all looking at it from different perspectives in terms of how quickly AI develops and how quickly it's adopted by different industries.
So maybe it's not about picking a winner, but more about trying to understand what are those key factors that could lead to those different outcomes.
Exactly. And one of the biggest factors is the pace of technological development.
Mm-hmm.
If AI keeps advancing at this crazy rate, then we could see much faster integration across different sectors, which could push us closer to those more optimistic projections.
So basically, the faster AI gets smarter, the faster our economy could grow.
Potentially, yes. But then there's also the question of adoption. Even if we have amazingly capable AI, it's not going to make a huge impact unless businesses and organizations actually start using it.
Which reminds me of that point that Acemoglu made about the mismatch between where investment is happening and where AI could actually be most impactful. Like it seems like a lot of the focus is on those big tech companies. Are smaller businesses potentially being left behind?
It's a valid concern. I think bridging that gap and making sure these tools are accessible to businesses of all sizes, that's going to be really important to make sure that the economic benefits, if there are benefits, are spread out more evenly.
Otherwise, we're just going to end up deepening the inequalities that already exist, right? Even more wealth and power concentrated in the hands of a few.
Exactly. It's not just about making the pie bigger. It's about how that pie gets sliced.
Okay, so let's think about the average worker for a minute. And a lot of people are, understandably, worried about AI taking their jobs. If you were talking to someone who's feeling anxious about their future, what advice would you give them?
I think the most important thing is to focus on adaptability. The reality is, as AI evolves, some jobs are going to change and new ones are going to emerge. So it's all about staying curious, continuing to learn, and focusing on developing those skills that complement AI rather than competing directly with it.
So instead of being afraid of AI, we should be thinking of it as a potential partner or a powerful tool that we can learn to use to our advantage.
Exactly. I mean, AI can automate those tedious tasks, free us up to focus on more creative or strategic work. It can give us insights and data that we wouldn't have access to otherwise. It can even enhance our own creativity and productivity. but it's up to us to figure out how to use these tools effectively.
So it's not about, becoming an AI expert ourselves, but understanding how AI is going to impact our own field and figuring out how we can leverage it to either do our jobs better or maybe even create entirely new opportunities.
That's a great way to put it. It's about embracing the change, figuring out how to thrive in this new landscape.
But what about those jobs that do seem like they're on track to be fully automated? What happens to those workers?
That's a really important question. It's something that we need to be thinking about very carefully, as a society. We need to be investing in retraining programs. Maybe we need to look at new models for things like social safety nets, or even policies like universal basic income. We need to make sure that everyone benefits from these advances, not just a select few.
So it's not just about individuals adapting, it's about our institutions adapting as well.
Absolutely. This is a global challenge. It requires collaboration, between governments, businesses, and individuals. We've got to create a future where AI empowers all of us, not just a select few, and that's not going to be easy.
No, that sounds like a pretty monumental task. It's going to take a lot of foresight and, willingness to change, which is hard for both people and for institutions.
It is. But, we've gone through technological disruptions before, and somehow we've always managed to adapt and find ways to thrive. I'm optimistic we can do the same with AI.
I like your optimism. It's easy to get caught up in all the, the doom and gloom predictions.
Yeah.
But it's important to remember that we actually have a lot of power to shape how this all unfolds. Okay, so before we jump into the next part of our deep dive, I want to circle back to that whole AI-generated humor thing. The fact that those AI jokes were actually funnier than the human ones, that's pretty wild.
It really makes you question our assumptions about humor, It seems like AI can analyze these massive data sets of jokes, figure out the patterns, the structure, and then create its own variations.
But does it really get humor? Is it possible for a machine to understand the nuance, the timing, that kind of emotional connection that makes us laugh?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question. Some argue that true humor is rooted in those shared human experiences, our emotions, our social context. It's about more than just punchlines. It's about connecting with other people.
Which makes me wonder if maybe AI can generate technically funny content, but not necessarily capture the essence of what makes us laugh.
Yeah, it's an interesting distinction. Maybe AI can make you chuckle, but can it make you really roar with laughter the way another person can?
So maybe stand-up comedians are safe for now. But what about other creative fields? I mean, we've seen AI generate music, poetry, even create some pretty amazing visual art. Is human creativity itself at risk?
That's the debate that's happening right now in the art world. You've got some artists who see AI as a threat, to their livelihoods, to the integrity of art itself. But you've got others who are really embracing it. They see it as a new tool for expression and exploration.
It seems like AI is kind of pushing the boundaries of what we even consider creative and forcing us to rethink the role of the human artist.
Absolutely. And it's not just about the output, it's about the process, too. AI is really challenging those traditional ideas about authorship, originality, artistic inspiration. It's prompting us to ask some pretty profound questions about what art even is.
So maybe it's not just about can AI create good art, but how AI is changing our understanding of art and creativity more broadly.
Exactly. And this is where things get really exciting, I think. AI isn't just a tool for artists. It's becoming a collaborator, a catalyst for whole new forms of artistic expression that we can't even imagine yet.
I love that. It's not AI versus humans. It's about what happens when you combine those unique strengths and perspectives.
Exactly. It's about embracing the unknown, pushing boundaries, and seeing where this journey takes us.
And speaking of journeys, I think it's time for us to continue exploring this AI landscape, maybe delve into some of the ethical considerations that come along with all of this. So we've covered so much in this deep dive. AI's impact on the economy, the future of work, even creative fields like art and music.
It's a huge topic, really, and I think we've only just scratched the surface.
Yeah. But there's one more area we need to explore before we wrap things up. I think it's the big question that always comes up when we're talking about AI.
The long-term implications, right? What does it all mean for humanity?
Exactly. Some of these sources are really hinting at some pretty big questions about, what this means for us as humans.
It's natural to feel a little bit apprehensive. I mean, we're talking about AI potentially reshaping so many parts of our lives.
And it's not just about jobs or the economy. It's about intelligence itself, about consciousness even. What does it even mean to be human if machines can do so much of what we do?
Those are big questions, and I don't think anyone has the answers yet.
But I do think it's important to start asking those questions now. I mean, we're right on the edge of this massive technological revolution.
I agree. We need to be thoughtful, proactive about how we shape the future of AI rather than just waiting to see what happens and reacting to it.
So let's start with the big one.
Yeah?
Artificial general intelligence, AGI. Machines that can think and learn just like humans, maybe even surpass us. Is that something we should actually be worried about?
It's a huge topic of debate. Some experts think it's a real possibility, maybe even in the not-too-distant future. Others say it's still just hypothetical.
So no one really knows for sure.
Not really. We just don't know enough yet to say for sure if or when machines might reach that level of intelligence.
Okay, well, let's just say, for the sake of argument, that AGI does happen. What are some of the risks we should be thinking about?
Well, one big one is something called the alignment problem. Basically, how do we make sure that the goals of an AGI actually align with our own goals?
How do we keep it from doing something that we don't want it to do?
Exactly. How do we make sure it doesn't misinterpret its instructions or develop its own goals that might conflict with what humans want?
That's kind of a scary thought, like that classic sci-fi idea, the robot that's trying to help, it ends up causing all kinds of chaos.
Right. And it's not about robots being evil or malicious. It's about making sure human intelligence and artificial intelligence are on the same page.
So how do we do that? I mean, how do we make sure these systems are designed in a safe and ethical way?
That's what a lot of really smart people are working on right now. We need to think carefully about the ethical implications, build in safeguards, and maybe even figure out new ways to communicate with these AIs.
And what about that idea of AI becoming conscious? Is that even possible?
Yeah. Now you're really getting into deep philosophical territory. I mean, we don't even fully understand human consciousness. So it's really hard to say if machines could ever experience something similar.
It's hard to even imagine what that would mean. A machine being aware of itself?
It's a question that's been around for centuries, but AI has really brought it to the forefront.
It feels like AI is making us ask these really fundamental questions, not just about technology, but about ourselves.
Absolutely. I mean, what does it even mean to be human? AI is forcing us to think about that in new ways.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I guess the big question is, where do we go from here? What are your thoughts on the future of AI and what it all means for us?
I think AI has incredible potential. To solve problems, make scientific breakthroughs, even create a better future.
But as we've been talking about, it's not all sunshine and roses.
Right. We need to be cautious, really think through the ethical implications, and commit to using it responsibly. And that means having open and honest conversations, talking about both the potential benefits and the risks, and working together to make sure AI is a force for good.
It's a challenge for everyone, really. Not just tech people, but policymakers, business leaders, artists, educators, everyday people.
We all have a role to play in shaping this future.
Well said. Well, I want to thank you so much for joining me today. This has been a really fascinating conversation.
I've enjoyed it too.
And to our listener, thanks for coming along on this deep dive with us. It's a complicated, ever-changing world, but one that's definitely worth exploring. Remember, the future isn't something that just happens. It's something we create. So let's make it a good one.